Before we begin, let's take a few moments to silence all electronic devices. In the presence of death, let us not fear, for we share it with all who have ever been and all who will ever be. For it is only the dust which returns to the dust as it was, but the spirit returns to God who gave it, and in God's hand is the care of every soul. The world we inhabit is a corridor to the world beyond. Let us prepare ourselves in that corridor to enter God's presence, for God is our employer who knows our labor as well as our sorrow. Faithful is God to give us the reward of our good deeds. We are redeemed from destruction and led in the way of everlasting life. Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai Rawi Lo Echzar. Benotesha Yar Bitzeni Al Mei Menuchot Yinachaleni. Nafshi Shovev Yancheni V'Maglei Tzedek Leman Shemo. Gam Ki Elech Begetza Mavet Lo Irara Ki Ata Imadi Shivtecha umishantecha, hema yenachamuni, taroch lefanai shulchan neget sorerai, deshanta v'shemen roshi kosi devayach tov, v'chesed, yirdefuni kol yemei chayai, v'shavti beveit Adonai, liorech yamin. A Psalm of David. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. In green fields, God lets me lie. By quiet streams, God leads me. God restores my soul. God guides me in paths of truth, for such is God's name. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no harm, for you are beside me. Your rod and staff, they comfort me. You spread a table before me in front of my enemies. You soothe my head with oil. My cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy seek me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. In loving memory of Stanley Alper, known in Hebrew as Shimon ben Moshe Udvorah, Shimon, the son of Moshe and Dvorah, we gather here to honor a life that was well lived, and to mourn the passing of a beloved father, husband, grandfather, and friend. Stanley Alper lived to the ripe age of 99 and leaves behind a life, a legacy of dedication, hard work, and love that will be cherished by those who knew him. We'll now be hearing from a few of those individuals. Now call upon Rosalie to join us here on the Bima. Right here.
Good morning. I want to first thank Ted, Karen, and Rusty for the honor and privilege of sharing our memories of Stan with all of you today. My name is Rosalie, and I'm here with my husband Scott and son Gabriel. And we had the gift of and privilege of living next door to Stan, Fran, and Rusty Alper for 13 years. When we moved in, we were a young family with 3 babies in diapers, whose grandparents were far away in other states. And we feel really fortunate and blessed to have bought our first home on a street filled with very good old-fashioned community love, and the Alpers were sort of the cornerstone of that love. Our family will never forget when Fran and Stan came and introduced themselves at our front door in April of 2002. They made their way up our long stairway with a delicious Duncan Hines cake baked by Rusty and decorated lovingly by him, and that was one of the many treats that he would make for us throughout the years. Our oldest 2 children, Chloe and Luca, were toddlers, and they ran up to see who was at the door. And I can still see Fran's beautiful smile and Stan's warm, sparkling eyes as he introduced himself to us by saying to the kids, "I'm Zadie, and this is Bubby. What are your names?" And from that point on, we had family in Maryland. Stan was a man of character with equal parts insight and mischief. Ever the storyteller, he had this gift of wry and comic wit. He was that rare person who would often leave you guessing as you walked away from a lazy afternoon conversation, wondering to yourself, was he pulling my leg? He knew so much about so much that there wasn't any reason to question his stories, but there were a few times when I think he added some curious details, just to see if I was paying attention. He'd kind of look directly into my eyes, and with the hint of a smile and a tilt of his head, he'd wait to see if I picked up on the joke. Occasionally, it wasn't until the next day or the next week when I saw him that I'd ask if he'd pulled my leg. And he'd say something sarcastic, like, "I thought you were becoming gullible." Our daughter, Chloe, describes his dry humor in this way. When he told us stories, he'd look over his glasses at us, and I never quite knew if he was kidding, till I saw this flash in his eye, and it was like permission to laugh. And we all felt that, and I think and assume probably most of you have had conversations and felt that same combination of awe and joy at the way he would poke fun at us in his interesting way, but it was always in an effort to tell stories and to make us feel comfortable. He was kind, funny, feisty, wise, curious, caring, active, and very generous. These are some of the words that come to mind in describing Stan. He was a conversationalist who wanted to share and learn, someone that you could talk to and disagree with, but it was never personalized or antagonistic. He always had that little smile. He also had fun, I say fun, quirky, rituals and habits. For example, he and Fran would enjoy their morning dates at McDonald's, where they would buy bagels and cream cheese. And Stan told us one day that he would secretly bring along some lox and add it to his meal. That was his ritual. He was a character. He played tennis into his 80s. He generously invited the neighborhood gang to Hunan Manor restaurant on his birthdays, and he volunteered to prepare taxes at the community center, even when the weather was freezing, and most people would stay in the warmth of their homes. No, not Stan. He would brave the ice, and as soon as we heard him start to shovel outside the window, we'd send the kids out to carve a path to the car. We tried to convince him not to go, but he said, "No, they need me," and he would always go. In all those years next door, we never had a bad interaction with Stan or Fran or the Alpers. In fact, some interactions were downright conspiratory. For example, Scott, my husband, and Stan would often spend time outside commiserating over the fact that Fran wouldn't give either of them permission to pull out any of her plants. Scott and Stan called them weeds. Fran didn't. She won. Looking back, a lot of our interactions took place outside, in our yards. Well, it was essentially one big yard, because Stan insisted that the kids play flashlight tag in their yard as well as ours, because they had better hiding places. When the Alpers would take a break from gardening to sit in their lawn chairs at the top of their front slope, the kids would walk around the yard with Stan, picking up sticks to make it easier for Fran to do her gardening. He was always worried about her, always caring. They would then sit and watch the squirrels and the birds. Stan would call the kids over for a special treat of filling the bird feeder. He gave the kids their own bird feeder a few years later, and since then, my dad and Gabriel have continued the bird feeding ritual that was launched in the Alper yard by Stan, Gabriel, and Augie, and every time any member of the family helps to fill those seeds, we think of Stan and we smile. But in the later years, what stands out is Stan's deep devotion to the love of his life, his wife, Fran. He was adamant that he would be the person to care for her, despite the many attempts that Ted and Karen made to convince him to find an alternative with greater safety and support. He doggedly insisted on being there to care for Fran in their home. During those years, we observed deep compassion, love, and patience. Chloe also shared, when Bubby got sick, Zadie took care of her with such devotion. It was quiet and steady and unwavering love. It was hard work, but he never made it look like effort. They were so sweet to each other, right to the end. She continued, long before that, when we were kids, I saw their love too. They'd tell us stories about their past. They were so visibly proud of one another. Zadie would tell us about how smart Bubby was, and he was beaming. Their love left a mark on our entire family. I'll end by sharing a brief message from our daughter, Chloe. Most people get 2 grandpas. I was lucky enough to have 3. Zadie took care of me and my brothers in so many ways growing up. Now that I'm an adult with neighbors of my own, I have a whole new appreciation of how special that was. How fortunate we were to know the love of a neighbor, especially right next door. That's hard to come by. I remember Zadie patiently teaching me how to rake leaves the right way, so they wouldn't get all caught up in the tines. I remember stepping inside the house, climbing the carpeted stairs up to the coziest living room, and listening to stories over cookies and chocolate. I remember late night games of flashlight tag, hiding along the hill on the right side of Bubby and Zadie's house, far away from the taggers, and bragging to my friends that my cool neighbors didn't care if we ran around in their yard. To live next door to the Alpers as a kid was to feel safe all the time. I'll miss them both dearly, but their memory is stitched into the fabric of my childhood forever. Rest in peace, Stan.
Now we'll hear from Ted.
So actually, the first thing I have is something that was written by my cousin Monty, who couldn't be here tonight but felt very strongly that he wanted to add something. So this is in Monty's voice. To me, he's Uncle Shimon, my mother's youngest brother, about 16 years older than I am. I'm not sure how old I was when I learned that his English name was Stanley. My earliest memories are when I was a kid and my grandparents, Bubby Dora and Zadie Morris, lived in the 2-bedroom apartment at 500 Christopher Street in the Brownsville section of Brooklyn. His bedroom was off the kitchen. My family visited there as often as we could from a town on the Jersey Shore. Of course, by then, Uncle Shimon was an adult and had embarked on his career. He was in the Navy during World War II, went to CCNY on the GI Bill, and became an engineer. He married Aunt Frances, and they moved to Schenectady, New York. They also lived in Nahant, Massachusetts. By coincidence, I, Monty, married a woman from Lynn, Massachusetts, which is adjacent to Nahant, but long after they were there. The next place where they lived that I will mention is Springdale, Connecticut. That was very important to me. It was while I was a senior in high school or a freshman at Rutgers. On many weekends, I traveled by train to their home, and Uncle Shimon helped me with math. I'm not sure I would have become an engineer without his help. Looking back, I realized he must have given up time with his young family to help me. Eventually, they moved to Silver Spring. To us, who all lived in the New York metropolitan area, it seemed like it was on another planet. As you know, they lived there for many years. As fate would have it, my daughter Donna and her family settled in Bethesda. On many of our trips here, we would visit with Aunt Fran and Uncle Shimon. We had many meals in their house, and in Friendly's, one of their favorite restaurants. How lucky we were. I really miss them. And now, in my own voice. So, I just need to start, and I realize that the timing of this funeral isn't ideal. The weather, several illnesses among the family, a family simcha in another state that's going on this weekend, have collectively kept many people away who would have liked to be here. And Dad outlived so many of his contemporaries, relatives, co-workers, colleagues, poker and tennis buddies, and other friends. It's ever harder to find people who knew him well in his prime. I mean, I'm his son, but he was already 37 when I was born. And by the time I was thinking about him analytically, he was probably about 50 or more. He still had half his life to go. But I only know his formative years through what he told me, which I don't always completely trust, and what others have told me. He was the baby of his family. He was the youngest of 8 children. One died in infancy, but there were 7 people in that house, and 7 children in that house, and he was the youngest. I can't wrap my head around that. I think of him as this loud, opinionated person, but when I saw him at family gatherings, I realized that he was the quiet, intellectual one. And he grew up in an environment that was so different than the one he lived in. He grew up in a house when there were still horse-drawn carts delivering milk and ice and seltzer to homes in Brooklyn. And he lived to be, in his early career, he was at the dawn of the computer age, industrial computing, and he lived well into the age of Google and Facebook. We played many games of cribbage in Facebook Messenger over the years, over these recent years. And it's just very hard, he grew up in such a different environment. And it's hard, there's very few people around who still remember him from that time. So it's a small funeral, and it's inevitably going to be an incomplete description of the person he was. But I think there might be a lesson in that, and it's a very dad-like lesson. If you have something that needs to be done, you just do it. There'll be other opportunities to share remembrances of him, but we need to do this now for him as best we can, and that seems very dad-like to me. Of all the things about my dad that were remarkable, and there were several, I think his drive and his unwavering focus to do something, to pay attention to something, were just unlike anyone else I've ever known. If he got an idea in his head, rightly or sometimes wrongly, he would seize it and not let it go and work at it tirelessly. If you told him that you were going to buy a car, the next day you would get email with 30 different reviews of cars and advice on which to do, and then when he'd call, he would ask about whether you'd read everything he wrote, and if you told him you had a problem, it became his problem. And he was going to do research and offer advice and push until things were resolved, maybe even after. Sometimes his focus could be borderline obsessive compulsive, or maybe even a little crazy. In 2010, there was a winter storm in Silver Spring, and they lost power for 3 days, 75 hours, I think, from start to finish. And my mom was already 80 and starting to have dementia, and my dad was 84 and still quite sharp, but nonetheless, these are people who are not in their prime. But he determined, well, we don't have electric power, we don't have heat in the house, but the hot water heater's working, we can fill the bathtub with hot water, we can camp out in the bathroom, and we'll be fine. And I mean, as an engineer, this is a perfect solution. This is, it's exactly, here's the problem, here's the solution, let's execute. And that's what he did. And listening on the phone from California, I thought, this is kind of crazy. This is, but you can't argue with his logic. I couldn't argue with his logic. I don't know that anybody could. When he had an idea and he knew what the solution was, that was going to be his focus and determination. And I mean, they did it. They camped out in the bathroom for 3 days and survived. He drove himself to do everything. I mean, he was a pretty smart guy. I mean, to be sure, I've known lots of smart people at fancy universities. He's a smart guy, but nobody could match him in terms of his drive and his determination. When he graduated from high school at age 17 during World War II, he worked at a machine shop until he turned 18, and then he enlisted in the Navy. And he kind of thought, again, this is from his descriptions to me, that would be, he would work in a machine shop. That would be his life and his career. And it wasn't until he was in the Navy that it opened his eyes to potential careers and to his own potential. He realized he was as smart as any of the people he was taking orders from. And so when he got out in 1946, he went to CCNY on the GI Bill. He became an engineer. Over the years, he worked at GE and AMF and RAC, Research Analysis Corporation, and SAIC. The stock, if you see those Leidos things at the airport, I look at those and I think, he was an early employee of SAIC, and that stock sent his grandchildren to college. But I remember when we were clearing out his house, when we finally agreed to move to assisted living, and because we found a place where he could stay with my mom, and where he could still be involved in her care, that was like, if that couldn't happen, it was a deal breaker for him. He wanted to be active in participating and taking care of her as long as he possibly could. But when he did that, we were cleaning out his house, and I found one of his old math books. And I think it was multivariate calculus, and every problem in the book, and the exercises in these books, they usually have like 50 or 70 problems, and instructors normally pick a subset of them that meet their needs, and they assign, but every single problem in the book had a check mark next to it. And I asked him about that. I said, and he said, well, I checked them off when I did them. And I said, your instructor assigned all these problems? He said, no, I just did them to be sure I understood the material. That's what you have to do. And this was news to me. I still can't quite wrap my head around that. His father used to tell him, he told me, Sitz auf die Bücher, sit on the books, do it. And that was my dad, very much so. Over the last, I think I'll cut this a little short. Well, no, there's a couple things. In many times in his life, I found another book, which was a combination of Chumash, Shabbat Siddur, from Congregation Ahava Shalom in Saugus, Massachusetts. And it turns out he was president of the men's club there. And probably, this is well before I was born. And it startles me because I don't think of him as a person, with all due respect to the environment, as someone who was particularly knowledgeable about or interested in Judaism. And he grew up in a traditionally observant household, but it didn't really take for him. But I think when he was there was a need. Nobody was stepping up to take this job, and so he took it on. When my siblings were in elementary school, somebody had to be president of the PTA. Nobody wanted to do it. He took it on. When I was a kid, there was Little League teams, and they didn't have enough people volunteering to be coaches. He didn't really care about baseball. I didn't really care about baseball. But this was the need. He took it on. And when he took it on, he took it seriously. And the house was filled with books about coaching Little League. And so often in his life, he would take on a job, this is Pirkei Avot, in a place where there's no men, strive to be a man. And that's him. In the last 12 or 15 years of his life, there was no shortage of doctors. He had a variety of medical issues that were some very serious and some manageable, but there was no shortage of doctors saying to him, you have this condition, you've lived a long life, your body can't take it anymore, you should just accept and let nature take its course. And his position was, there's still life here, what are the options, what's the most aggressive treatment, what's the risks? Let's look at it, let's decide on a course of action, let's do it. And it served him really well. I mean, I think up until very shortly before his first, in fact, even the last thing before his death, before his last visit to the hospital, one of the last things, and even after he was in the hospital, he was still talking about it, was looking at the tax situation, making sure that the financial, that gifts to children and grandchildren to avoid gift taxes and to avoid estate taxes. This was on his mind, and I respect it, I'm grateful for it, but it's like he was thinking about other people. He was always kind of focusing on the bottom line. He was extremely focused and very hard to change the subject on when he had a topic that he wanted to present. And I don't know, I don't think I've ever known anyone who possessed that to the degree that he did. And I can't say that I do that to the way he did, but I certainly respected and admired it and benefited from it for my whole life. Sure.
And now we'll hear from Karen.
I'm not sure I can do this, but I'm going to try. First of all, Rosalie, what you were describing about my father, about you didn't know if he was pulling your leg or not, he was doing that right up all through this past year. He told some of the nurses at the facility he was at the last 10 months of his life, he said he was exiled to Siberia. And some of them, they're 18 years old, they believed him. So that trait was absolutely him. There's so many things I could say, so it's hard to choose just a couple. One thing I'll describe, and I think most of you know that I spent the last 9 years every day with my parents. And if I didn't see them, we would talk on the phone 10 times. I have so many stories. But one thing that I want to talk about is after they both moved to New Hampshire, and my mom was still alive, and she also had dementia, and it was either Memorial Day or July 4th, a holiday where they were setting off fireworks and making loud noise and the usual celebrations. And so my mother was very bothered, by what's going on outside. It was nighttime. Where's all that noise coming? They must be doing something bad. Why are they doing that? And I would explain to her, this is, there's some people, this is the way they think it's fun, this is the way we celebrate. And I couldn't get through to her that she wanted to go outside and tell them to stop. And then she went to my father and said, Stanley, they're doing this, it's wrong. What's wrong with you? Why aren't you going out there? It's what you would always do. Why aren't you going to tell them to stop? And so she knew, even in her dementia, that if something wasn't right, he would do the right thing. If people were doing something bad and he saw it, he would intervene. And so it's important. I mean, that's who he was. And my mother knew it even when she no longer knew a lot. The other story that I was thinking about, in this past year, he's been talking to me a lot about being a classy person. I told him that someone I thought was my friend had sent me a message that was kind of nasty, and I had this reaction where I wanted to respond in kind. And again, he's last few months of his life, and he's saying, no, don't do that. You're classier than that. You're better than that. Always respond nicely. Always respond kindly. And so he was teaching me, even at this point, I would say that I did my best, and I learned a lot. Caring for both of them was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. And it was an honor, and I really miss them. Somebody else is showing she wants to speak. Eva wants to speak again.
Eva.
Let me see, good morning, I'm Eva Stolwine, I'm I was the wife of the late Danny Alper, Stanley Alper's son, of course. What I wanted to share about, I didn't realize I wanted to talk, but as we sit here, I remember so many amazing things about Stanley, better known as Zadie, about his generosity of time and spirit. So when I was dating Danny, I lived in this little small house in Cabin John Gardens, and Stanley would come over and he built a flower box for me, and he I think when he hung a birdhouse for me at the house in Cabin John Gardens. And then eventually Danny and I, when we married, we moved to a different house in Cabin John. Not a real big house, but there were really bad problems with the drainage in the backyard. Well, that's Stanley. He didn't mind getting dirty and digging, and he went into the backyard and he dug up some trenches and put in that thick black corrugated pipe, and he helped me with the sump pump. He was always there for me and Danny and lots of other people. And I want to share a few other things about Zadie, that I used to volunteer at the front desk in the gift shop at Holiday Park Senior Center, and I saw Franny and Stanley working there, volunteering for the SHIP program, SHIP, helping seniors get health insurance. They was always out there helping people, volunteering, up and out. And the last thing I want to share is I'm so grateful that this past November, my daughter Sarah Alper, and it's my fault Sarah's not here because I thought we weren't coming because of the weather, but anyway. But, so that's my fault that Sarah's not here, but, so Sarah Alper, and most of you know that Danny and I adopted her from China when she was a baby. But what I want to say, this past November, I'm so grateful. Sarah, my significant other, Bill Houston, and I went to New Hampshire to visit Zadie, and we lived it up. He was practically all there. You know, not that much dementia. Of course, he remembered things long ago in Brooklyn, but he remembered some things from the recent past. We ate at a bunch of restaurants, Betty's restaurant, and we really had a great time. And so what I'm saying is, I'm so grateful that we saw Stanley, Zadie, when he really could have fun and live it up. It was just about 2 months ago, this past November. So, thank you for letting me speak about Zadie.
Thank you very much. Stanley's journey began in Brooklyn. He was born there, and he was born at home, and that was not that unusual in those days. Jimmy Carter, who we just buried this past week, was the first president born in a hospital. So, but in a city like New York, yes, people were born at home. He was the youngest of 8 children. And after completing high school, he served in the Navy. Soft spot in my heart. I was a Navy Reserve chaplain myself before pursuing his academic aspirations, and dedicated himself to his studies, earning a PhD in mechanical engineering from Catholic University, which was a testament to his perseverance and his intelligence. He was characterized by excellence throughout his career. He had a meticulous nature, and I understand that could drive some people a bit batty, but they understood, ultimately speaking, that that was a gesture of love. It was his way of showing how much he cared. He would sing during moments, special moments with his family, and his love with his grandchildren filled him with pride and dedication, and he was always, always concerned. So concerned about his family, it never wavered. In his 50s, this is amazing, he took up tennis. It's about the age that most people start dropping tennis. It's a testament to his determination and his drive to always to push himself to new heights. He embodied the virtues of kindness, of integrity, of reliability, and earning the august title Mensch, a person of honor and integrity. We Jews don't have knighthoods, but we do accord that title Mensch to individuals. As we bid a final farewell to Stanley Alper, let us remember his unwavering spirit, his kindness, and the values that we held dear, that we shared in common with him. And may his legacy live in the memories that we share and the stories that we tell. And may his soul find peace, and may his memory be a blessing to all of us. Stanley Alper, may your memory be a blessing, and may you rest in eternal peace. Uvetzror betzror chayim et nishmato. May his soul be bound up in the bond of eternal life, and let us say amen. At this time we rise for the El Mole Rachamim Memorial Prayer. El Mole Rachamim Shochin Bamromim Hamanatzem Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei HaShechina V'Ma'alot Kedoshim Tahorim Kazor Akim Azirim Et Nishmat Shimon ben Moshe Udvora Shalach Lolamo B'Gan Eden Tein Benuchato Ana Bal HaRachamim Hasterehu Beseter Kanfecha Liolamim Uvetzror Betzror Chayim Et Nishmato Adonai Hu Nachlato V'Tanuach B'Shalom Am Mishkovo V'Nomar Amen. O God, exalted and full of compassion, grant perfect peace in your sheltering presence among the holy and pure, to the soul of Shimon, the son of Moshe, and Dvorah Stanley Alper, who has gone to his eternal home. Master of mercy, we beseech you to remember all of the worthy and righteous deeds he performed in the land of the living. May his soul be bound up in the bond of eternal life. The Lord is his portion. May he rest in peace. And let us say, Amen.